The manipulative and cruel stepmother forbade the poor little girl from having dinner at the table with everyone else, and on top of that, she only gave her a piece of old bread and a dirty wooden board to eat on the floor. What no one expected was that the millionaire would manage to finish all his busy work and join dinner. As soon as he arrived, he caught the stepmother's cruel act. Minutes later, what he did left everyone trembling. The smell of roast beef drifted up the marble staircase, a warm, delicious promise that made little Lena's stomach rumble softly. At 8 years old, she knew that scent meant a party, laughter, and, if she was lucky, a slice of cake for dessert. Hidden at the top of the stairs, in her simplest but impeccably clean dress, she spied on the dining hall below. The solid mahogany table, so long it looked like a dark river, was covered with a white linen tablecloth that fell in perfect folds to the floor. The silverware gleamed under the light of the crystal chandeliers, and the wine glasses looked like diamonds waiting for their pour. It was a fairy tale scene, but one in which Lena never felt like a princess. Her stepmother, Veronica, presided over the table like a queen on her throne. Her blue silk dress shimmered, and her smile was a work of art, polished and immobile. The guests, all Veronica's relatives, laughed at a joke her brother-in-law had just told, a sharp sound that conveyed not joy, but formality. Lena's father, Richard, a man whose fortune was as vast as his absence, wasn't there. He had called earlier, his voice hurried on the phone, explaining that an urgent deal involving a new cryptocurrency fund would keep him at his Wall Street office late. Veronica received the news with a sigh of calculated disappointment for the guests. But Lena, from her observation post, saw a fleeting glint of satisfaction in her eyes. This was the perfect opportunity. With her heart beating a nervous march against her ribs, Lena descended the steps one at a time, her worn little shoes making an almost inaudible sound on the Persian rug. She approached the table, her small hands clasped in front of her, and waited for a pause in the conversation. When the silence finally came, she used her sweetest, most timid voice. "Excuse me, may I join you for dinner?" The laughter stopped instantly. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others cold, but Veronica's was the most cutting of all. Her stepmother's porcelain smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of controlled irritation. "Lena, what have I told you about interrupting adults? This is a dinner for family, a grown-up affair." One of the uncles chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Let the girl be, Veronica. She's just a child." But Veronica raised a hand, silencing him. She rose, the fabric of her dress whispering as she walked toward Lena. She didn't kneel to speak to the girl. Instead, she looked down at her, her shadow swallowing her whole. "In my house, we value order and discipline. You have yet to learn the rules." Without another word, she took Lena's hand with surprising force and pulled her to a cold corner of the room, far from the warmth of the fireplace and the glow of the table. The guests watched, complicit in their silence. Veronica disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and returned, not with a plate of hot food, but with a small, rough wooden board. On it lay a heel of dark bread, visibly old and hard as a rock. With a curt gesture, she placed the board on the polished marble floor at Lena's feet. "If you're hungry, your dinner is served. Now, be silent and do not disturb us again." Lena looked down at the solitary piece of bread on the board, then at the lavish table, where the guests were already resuming their conversation, ignoring her. A hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, falling silently onto the cold floor. The humiliation was a tight knot in her throat, more painful than any hunger she had ever felt. The marble beneath her knees was cold and unforgiving, a solid indifference that seemed to seep up into her body and settle in her heart. Lena didn't dare to cry loudly. A silent sob shook her small shoulders, but she swallowed it, afraid of drawing more of Veronica's wrath. The sound of conversation from the table was a distant cruel melody, punctuated by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. Every laugh was a stab at her loneliness. With trembling fingers, she touched the bread. The crust was hard, almost petrified, and its rough texture scratched the tip of her finger. The hunger, once a dull ache, was now a sharp presence, a constant reminder of her exclusion. Hidden beneath the skirt of her dress, her other hand clutched a small silver locket she always wore around her neck. Inside, a tiny photo of her mother, smiling, with eyes that promised unconditional love. It was her only treasure, a fragment of a past where she belonged, where dinners were warm and her place at the table was guaranteed. She whispered her mother's name, a sound lost in the room's hum. The memory gave her a spark of courage, the strength to survive this moment. Closing her eyes, she brought the bread to her mouth. Her small teeth could barely scratch the surface. The effort made her jaw ache, and the taste of dust and staleness filled her mouth. A salty tear finally escaped, wetting the hard crust and making it even more unpalatable. By the kitchen door, Eleanor, the grey-haired housekeeper who had been with the family long before Veronica's arrival, watched the scene with a heavy heart. She had seen Lena born, tended to her scraped knees, and celebrated her birthdays. To witness this cruelty was torture. She knew Veronica's power, her ability to manipulate Richard and control every aspect of the household, as if the family's vast portfolio was just a game board for her to play on. But the sight of Lena, so small and helpless, made her forget her fear. Waiting for the moment Veronica turned to toast one of the guests, Eleanor moved quickly. From her pocket, she pulled a ripe, juicy purple plum she had saved for the girl. With silent steps, she knelt beside Lena, offering the fruit in a quick, secret gesture. "Eat this, dear. Quickly," she whispered. Her eyes filled with a loving urgency. Lena's eyes widened. The plum was a spot of color and life in this gray corner. Her small hand reached out, her fingers almost touching the fruit's velvety skin, an oasis of sweetness in her desert of humiliation. But the moment of hope was shattered by an icy voice. "What do you think you're doing?" Veronica stood over them. Her eyes, hard as chips of ice, were fixed on Eleanor. She snatched the plum from the housekeeper's hand before Lena could touch it. "I gave an order," Veronica said, her voice low and hissing, more frightening than any shout. "In this house, discipline applies to everyone, including the staff. The girl will eat what I told her to eat." With a look of contempt at the fruit in her hand, Veronica walked to an elegant wicker trash bin in the corner. Without hesitation, she dropped the perfect plum inside. The soft thud of the fruit hitting the bottom of the bin echoed in the silence that had formed around Lena, a dull thud that sealed her last hope of kindness for the night. Eleanor retreated into the darkness of the kitchen, casting one last look of helpless sorrow at Lena before disappearing. The door clicked shut, and with it went the only source of warmth in the hall. Lena was completely alone now, an island of misery in an ocean of indifference. The laughter at the table resumed, a little louder this time, as if to fill the vacuum left by the brief interruption. They had forgotten her, or worse, they had dismissed her. Travis, Veronica's brother, a man with a thin moustache and small eyes that always seemed to be calculating something, refilled his wine glass and raised it toward his sister. "You have a firm hand, Veronica. It's what this house needed. A little strict upbringing never hurt anyone," he said, with a smirk of approval that didn't reach his eyes. "Back in my day, children knew their place." One of the aunts nodded in agreement, adjusting the pearls around her neck. "Exactly. Discipline is the foundation of everything. Richard, with his immense fortune and endless deals, hardly has time for these things. He's lucky to have you to keep order." Their words were like stones thrown at her. Strict upbringing, discipline. To Lena, those words sounded like synonyms for cruelty. She wasn't misbehaving, she was just hungry. Her gaze swept over the guests' faces, one by one. None of them looked at her. Their eyes were fixed on their full plates, on their wine glasses, on Veronica. They were accomplices, not by action, but by their terrible, crushing omission. They were witnesses to her pain and did nothing. Adelaide, Veronica's mother, a woman whose sour expression seemed permanently etched onto her face, gave a small, dry tap of her fork. In any case, she'd better get used to dinners like this. With Richard expanding his capital with overseas investments, I doubt he'll be home for a family dinner anytime soon. A man like him, with so many assets to manage, lives in another world. The sentence hit Lena with the force of a slap. The hope that her father might walk through that door at any moment, the last fragile flame that warmed her, flickered and nearly died. He wasn't coming. They were saying he had abandoned her to this table, to this cold floor. The pain of hunger was replaced by a deep, chilling despair. She clutched the locket so tightly that the metal edge dug into her palm. Her mother's image was all she had left of a time when she was loved unconditionally. Hunger, however, was a persistent tyrant. With an effort that seemed to drain all her energy, she picked up the bread again. Using all the strength of her small jaw, she bit down. A hard, mealy piece broke off and fell onto her tongue. It was dry, tasteless, and scratched her throat as she tried to swallow. It was like eating dust and sadness. At the exact moment she struggled to swallow the bitter mouthful, Veronica's voice cut through the air, clear and commanding. She stood, her crystal glass held high, the light from the chandeliers fracturing in it into 1,000 glittering pieces. A triumphant smile danced on her lips. "A toast!" she declared, her gaze sweeping the table and landing for a cruel instant on Lena, huddled on the floor. "To the new phase, a phase without inconveniences." Veronica's words, "without inconveniences," hung in the air and then fell upon Lena with the weight of a sentence. She was the inconvenience. The pebble in her stepmother's silk shoe, the smudge on the perfect family portrait Veronica worked so hard to paint. The guests raised their glasses, the sound of crystal clinking like tiny funeral bells for the little girl's dignity. They drank to her erasure, to her invisibility. In that moment, something inside Lena, something small and stubborn, refused to break. With her fingers still aching, she opened the locket's clasp. Her mother's smiling face gazed back at her. It was a worn photo, the edges soft from how often she touched it. In the image, her mother was holding her, and Lena remembered the warmth, the smell of lavender, and the overwhelming feeling of being the center of someone's universe. To her mother, she wasn't an inconvenience. She was a treasure, a legacy of love. That memory was her shield. With a new, grim determination, she turned her attention back to the bread. It was her only battle tonight, and she would not lose it. Bite after bite, she fought against the hard crust, the dry center crumbling in her mouth. It was grueling work, and every piece she managed to swallow was a small victory. The tears continued to fall, silent and hot, tracing salty paths on her crumb-dusted face. She was eating and crying at the same time, the physical hunger and emotional pain mixing into a bitter knot that tore its way down her throat. The table, oblivious to her silent drama, moved on to the main course. Catered waiters served succulent slices of rosemary roast lamb, accompanied by golden potatoes and fresh asparagus. The aroma was torture. Lena could see the glint of melted butter, the steam rising from the plates. Every forkful the guests took was a reminder of what she had been denied. Meanwhile, miles away, the city lights blurred past the window of a luxury sedan. Richard, Lena's father, leaned his head back against the soft leather seat. The meeting had ended earlier than expected. A major cryptocurrency investment he'd been negotiating for weeks had finally closed, securing a substantial profit for his already immense portfolio. He was exhausted, his mind still spinning with numbers, projections, and his company's cash flow. But one thought pulled him back home. Lena's smile. He felt guilty for his absence. He knew the money and fortune he was accumulating were to secure her future, but he also knew that lost time couldn't be bought back, not with all the gold in the world. "Faster, please, George," he said to the driver. "I want to get home to say goodnight to my daughter." The car glided smoothly up the mansion's driveway. Instead of stopping at the main entrance where the guests' cars were parked, Richard had George drop him at the side entrance, which led directly to his study. He wanted to leave his briefcase and coat before joining the party. He entered the house quietly. The muffled sound of conversation and laughter came from the dining hall. He smiled, imagining everyone's surprise at his arrival. He walked down the dark corridor that flanked the dining room, a passageway used by the staff. There was a small crack in the door, and he paused for a moment, peeking in. Wanting to get a sense of the party before he entered, he saw Veronica, radiant at the center of attention. He saw her relatives, eating and drinking his wealth. He scanned the long table for his daughter, expecting to see her brown hair shining under the chandelier light. But the chair that should have been hers was empty. His heart skipped a beat with worry. Where was she? Sick, already in bed. Then his gaze drifted downward, sweeping the floor at the foot of the table, and he saw her huddled in the corner on the cold marble, small, alone. Before her, a wooden board with something he could barely identify. His eyes narrowed, the mind of a multimillionaire, accustomed to analyzing every detail of a deal, focused on the scene with horrifying clarity. He saw the stale bread, his daughter's humiliated posture, and the sumptuous banquet just feet away. The smile on his face vanished, replaced by a mask of ice. The warmth of anticipation in his chest turned into a cold, cutting rage. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just watched, hidden in the shadows, as the truth of his own home revealed itself before his eyes, more shocking and cruel than any betrayal in the world of business. From the shadows of the hallway, Richard watched the scene unfold with a painful clarity that no profit and loss statement could ever provide. Every detail was a needle piercing his heart. The gleam of the silver, the deep red of the wine, the forced laughter of Veronica's relatives. It was all part of a grotesque farce that he himself had financed. He, a man who controlled a vast portfolio, who dealt in dollars and euros as easily as he breathed, who understood the complex fluctuations of stocks and crypto markets, had failed to notice the cruelest devaluation happening under his own roof. His daughter, his most precious asset, the only living legacy of his first love, was being treated like a liability, a nuisance to be hidden in a corner. The rage building inside him wasn't hot and explosive, but cold and precise, like steel. It was the rage of a man who had just discovered a fundamental betrayal, a breach of contract at the very foundation of his life. Every laugh from the guests was another point of interest accrued on this debt of cruelty. He remained still, his breathing controlled, the strategic mind of a magnate analyzing the situation. To act on impulse would be a mistake. He needed to see how far Veronica's cruelty would go. He needed irrefutable proof, not just for himself, but for everyone in that room. He would leave no room for excuses or manipulation. He wanted the truth, raw and naked, illuminated by the chandelier light so no one could deny it. And then, a fragile sound cut through the cacophony of the dinner. It was Lena's voice, small, but weighted with a question that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She raised her head, her tear-swollen eyes fixed on her stepmother's imposing figure. "Why can't I eat at the table, Mommy?" The word "Mommy" left her lips like a plea, a last-ditch attempt to appeal to a shred of affection she still believed was there. For Richard, hidden away, the word was like a dagger, the innocence of the question. The desperate search for logic in the injustice was more devastating than any accusation. The room fell silent for an instant. All eyes turned to Veronica. This was her stage, and she knew it. With an air of exasperation, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child, she answered without even bothering to look directly at Lena. "Because this place," she said, gesturing to the table with a hand adorned with expensive rings, "is for people who contribute to the harmony of this family. You, with your stubbornness, still need to learn your place. Consider this part of your education." The answer was the final blow. There was no ambiguity, no possibility of misinterpretation. It was a declaration of exclusion, delivered with the coldness of someone signing an unimportant document. In that moment, Richard's hesitation evaporated. The strategist gave way to the father. The man who had built a fortune from nothing felt the ground shake beneath him, not from a stock market crash, but from the eruption of a volcano within himself. He saw Lena's small hand tremble as she picked up the hard bread once more, accepting her sentence with a resignation that broke what was left of his heart. Enough. The observation was over. Slowly, he pushed the hallway door open. The heavy wood creaked, a low, foreboding sound that made a few heads turn. He stepped out of the darkness, his tall, imposing figure filling the doorway. His face, once obscured by shadow, was suddenly revealed by the chandelier light, and on it there was no fatigue from work, no joy of surprise. There was only a storm about to break. Richard's entrance into the dining hall had the effect of a stone thrown into a still pond. Conversations stopped abruptly. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips, and a heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. All eyes, previously focused on the splendor of the table or the cruel figure of Veronica, were now fixed on him, wide with surprise and, for some, a growing sense of dread. Lena, from her place on the floor, was the last to notice. Hearing the sudden hush, she looked up with watery eyes, confused at first. Then, through the veil of tears, she saw the tall, familiar figure standing in the doorway. "Daddy!" she whispered. The word so fragile it was barely audible, yet it carried a shockwave of hope that made her tremble. Her heart, which had been beating slow and heavy with sorrow, now hammered in her chest. He was here. He had come. Veronica was the first to recover from the shock. Her face paled for a split second, a nearly invisible crack in her porcelain facade, but she was a master of damage control. She quickly composed a radiant smile, though it was a little tight at the corners of her mouth. "Richard, darling, what a wonderful surprise!" she exclaimed, her voice a little too loud. She stood and glided toward him, her silk dress whispering against the marble. "We weren't expecting you so soon. Did your business go well, my love? We were just toasting to your success." She tried to kiss him, a calculated gesture to reassert her intimacy and control in front of the guests. But Richard turned his head, and her kiss met the air. His eyes weren't on her. They were fixed, like lasers, on the scene she was desperately trying to cover up. Their daughter, on the floor, with a board and a piece of bread. "What is going on here, Veronica?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a cutting quality, a chill that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. It was the same tone he used to close multi-million-dollar deals, a tone that brooked no lies or evasions. Veronica's relatives glanced at each other nervously. Travis, the brother-in-law, tried to defuse the situation with a forced laugh. "Richard, good to see you. We were just, teaching the girl a little lesson in etiquette. Family business, you know?" Veronica seized on this lifeline. "That's right, darling. Just a little lesson. Lena was being a bit stubborn, and I thought a moment to reflect would help her understand the importance of behaving at the table. It was just a game to teach her." "A game," Richard repeated, the word sounding like an insult on his lips. He stepped forward, completely ignoring his wife and the guests. His eyes met Lena's, and for the first time that night, the girl saw not pity, but a protective fury that was so intense it almost frightened her. He walked slowly to the corner where she was huddled, each step echoing in the deathly quiet room. He said nothing. He knelt before her. On the cold marble floor, his expensive, immaculate suit creasing without a hint of concern, with a gentleness that contrasted brutally with the emotional violence of the room. He touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "Daddy," she whispered again, her voice choked with emotion. I just wanted to have dinner." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if to contain the wave of pain and rage that threatened to overflow. Then he looked at the piece of stale bread on the board, the undeniable evidence of the cruelty his daughter had endured. He picked it up. The bread was light, but in his hand it felt like it weighed a ton. He stood, his face a mask of contained fury, and turned to face the entire table. And then, with a roar that made the chandeliers tremble and the glasses vibrate, he exploded, unleashing the storm that had been building inside him. "Enough!" Richard's shout echoed through the hall like thunder, shattering the spell of the party. The sound reverberated off the crystal, silenced the whispers, and froze every guest in their chair. For a long, tense moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Veronica, her hand to her chest, stared at her husband with a mixture of shock and terror. Her calculated smile had disintegrated, revealing the frightened, furious woman beneath the mask. She opened her mouth to speak, to weave another of her manipulative excuses, but the look on Richard's face silenced her. The initial burst of rage had passed, giving way to something far more frightening. A glacial calm, a clarity of purpose that was absolute and unshakable. He wasn't shouting anymore. He didn't need to. The power emanating from him was as palpable as the vast fortune he controlled. It was the power of a man who made decisions that altered the course of companies and markets, and who was now about to alter the course of his own home. Completely ignoring his wife and the terrified looks of the guests, Richard did something no one expected. He walked to the head of the table, the place of honor where he himself should have been sitting. With a deliberate movement, he pulled out the heavy, carved oak chair upholstered in crimson velvet. He didn't drag it. He lifted it, the strain visible in the muscles of his arms, and carried it across the room. The act was so unexpected, so bizarre, that everyone just watched, mesmerized. He set the majestic chair down on the marble floor, right next to where Lena was still huddled. Then, with the same gentleness he'd used to wipe her tears, he lifted her into his arms. Lena clung to him, the familiar scent of her father, a mix of expensive cologne and the cold night air enveloping her like a safe blanket. She buried her face in his shoulder, feeling the expensive fabric of his suit against her cheek. He placed her gently in the velvet chair. To Lena, it was like ascending a throne. Suddenly, she was no longer looking up at distant, disdainful faces. She was at their level, even taller than some of the seated guests. The table, once a symbol of her exclusion, now stretched before her, a banquet at her disposal. The shift was so sudden, so dizzying, she was left breathless. Richard straightened her dress and then turned to the table. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but every syllable was like a shard of glass. "In this house," he began, his eyes sweeping over each pale face, "the rules have just changed. The greatest asset in this portfolio is not the mutual funds, not the stocks, not the gold in the vault. The greatest treasure in this family is this little girl." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And from this day forward, her place is here." He pointed to the chair where Lena sat, now effectively the new head of the table. The reversal was not just an act of defiance, it was a complete restructuring of power. He wasn't just saving his daughter, he was publicly dismantling Veronica's reign of tyranny. Then, he bent down and picked up the wooden board from the floor. The stale bread was still on it, a grim relic of the humiliation from minutes before. He held it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of evidence in a courtroom. He looked at the sumptuous feast on the table, at the lamb, the golden potatoes, the expensive wine, and then his gaze locked on Veronica and then on each of her relatives, one by one. A cold smile, devoid of any warmth. touched his lips. "Dinner," he announced, his voice dangerously soft, "will only continue after one thing is made very clear to everyone." The silence in the dining room was now so thick it seemed to have weight and texture. No one dared to move. Silverware rested abandoned on plates, the untouched food growing cold. All eyes were on Richard, who stood with the wooden board and stale bread in one hand, the other resting protectively on Lena's shoulder. He was the room's center of gravity, and his every word was awaited with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You," he began, his voice still low but resonating with unquestionable authority, "are my guests. You eat my food, you drink my wine, and you enjoy the comfort of my home." He paused, his gaze sweeping slowly over each embarrassed face, lingering for an extra moment on Travis and Veronica's mother. "And while you were here, sitting at my table, you watched my daughter be humiliated. You saw an 8-year-old child forced to eat on the floor like an animal, and you did nothing. Worse, some of you mocked her." Travis swallowed hard, his face paling. "Richard, it was a misunderstanding. We thought it was a form of discipline," Veronica assured us. "Silence," Richard cut in, and the word was so sharp that Travis shrank back in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. "There is no misunderstanding when the cruelty is this clear. You were accomplices, complicit by omission, by convenience, by fear of losing the privileges this association provides you." He turned to Veronica, who stared back at him with wide eyes, disbelief giving way to impotent rage. "And you, Veronica, you orchestrated this spectacle. You used my daughter to demonstrate your power, to massage your ego in front of your family. You turned my house, my daughter's home, into a stage for your insecurity and your malice." The accusation was direct, brutal, and public. Veronica tried to defend herself, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you? I take care of this house. I maintain the order that you, with your trips and your deals, failed to maintain. She needs to learn boundaries." "Boundaries!" Richard laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "You know nothing about boundaries. You know about power. And you thought that in my absence, your power was absolute. You made a miscalculation. You underestimated my most important asset." He glanced down at Lena, and his face softened for an instant. She was watching him, her eyes wide with reverent awe. Her fear was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of safety, of justice being served. She could feel his strength like a shield around her. Richard then turned back to the table. In a gesture that shocked everyone, he grabbed the white linen tablecloth and she, with one strong, swift pull, dragged everything from Veronica's empty place setting. Porcelain plates, silver cutlery, the crystal goblet half filled with wine. It all crashed to the floor with a deafening shatter of glass and splintering china. Shards flew, and red wine spread across the marble like a pool of blood. Veronica's mother let out a sharp cry. "That," Richard said, pointing to the mess on the floor, "is your place at my table, Veronica, empty, until you understand what decency is, until you understand that a person's worth isn't measured by the money they have, but by the respect they offer." He then looked at the others. "As for the rest of you, dinner is over. Stand up." No one moved. They were paralyzed. "I said, stand up," he repeated, and this time his voice held an iron command. Slowly, one by one, Veronica's relatives rose, awkward and shamed, their faces a mixture of humiliation and anger. "Now, get out of my house." Richard's command hung in the air, unequivocal and final. It wasn't a request, it was a decree. For a moment, Veronica's family stood motionless, like wax figures in a museum of humiliation. Their faces displayed a range of emotions: shock, indignation, but above all, the raw shame of being publicly unmasked and expelled. They had come for a lavish dinner, expecting to bask in the wealth and status their association with Richard afforded them. Instead, they were being stripped of their dignity, one course at a time. Travis was the first to break the paralysis. With a look of barely contained fury, he threw his linen napkin onto the table. "This is an outrage. We're family. You can't treat us like this," he hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the weak protest of a man who knew he had lost. "Family," Richard answered, his voice low and dangerous. "Family doesn't watch in silence while a child is abused. Family protects its own. You demonstrated tonight that you are only interested in the benefits of my net worth, not the bonds that should unite us. Therefore, you are no longer welcome here." Adelaide, Veronica's mother, let out a dramatic sob. "After everything we've done for you, for this house, Veronica dedicates herself to you, to your life." Her dedication tonight was to a performance of cruelty. Richard interrupted coldly. "The conversation is over. Please, leave. Now." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. One by one, they began to move, gathering their purses and coats in an awkward silence. Their looks toward Veronica were a mixture of pity and accusation. She, who had invited them to witness her power, had now made them witnesses to her downfall. It was a humiliation they would not soon forget. As they shuffled toward the door, Richard turned to Eleanor, the housekeeper, who was watching from the kitchen doorway with tears of relief welling in her eyes. "Eleanor, please see our guests out." His voice to her was soft, respectful. It was a silent acknowledgement of her loyalty, of her attempt to help Lena. Eleanor nodded, her face alight with profound gratitude. She walked past Veronica without a glance and guided the funereal procession of relatives out of the hall. Veronica was left behind, alone amidst the ruined splendor of her party. She stared at her husband, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You will regret this, Richard," she said, her voice concentrated poison. "You have humiliated my family. You have humiliated me." Richard faced her, his eyes as cold as steel. "No, Veronica, I didn't humiliate you. I just showed everyone the truth you tried to hide. The humiliation is all yours. You built it piece by piece, with every cruel word and every gesture of contempt toward my daughter." He then walked to the bountiful table. He picked up the most beautiful plate, fine china with a gold-leafed rim, and began to fill it. He served a generous slice of the roast lamb, added the most golden potatoes, the greenest asparagus. It was a plate fit for a king, or rather, a princess. With the plate in hand, he returned to where Lena sat on her throne-like chair, still watching everything with wide eyes, her little heart trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. He set the sumptuous plate before her, replacing the wooden board and the stale bread. He took the silver fork and knife and placed them beside it. "This, my love," he said, his voice now filled with a warmth and tenderness that made her cry again, but this time from relief. "This is your place, and this is your dinner, and no one, ever again, will take that away from you." Lena looked at the plate before her, a miniature feast that seemed to have come from a dream. The aroma of rosemary lamb rose in a warm cloud, making her stomach rumble, but now it was a sound of happy anticipation, not of pain. The golden sheen of the potatoes, the vibrant green of the asparagus. It was the most beautiful food she had ever seen. But more important than the food was the gesture. It was tangible proof that she was seen, that she mattered. Her father had not just saved her from humiliation, he had elevated her, honored her in front of everyone. With trembling fingers, she picked up the heavy fork. The silver was cool against her skin, but her heart was warm. She looked up at her father, who was watching her with a tender smile, a smile that dispelled all the shadows of the night. He pulled a chair from the table, one of the simple ones, not Veronica's, and sat beside her, not at the head, but as an equal, a dinner companion. "Eat, sweetheart," he said softly. "You must be starving." She took the first bite. The meat was soft and juicy, melting in her mouth, an overwhelming contrast to the hard bread that had scratched her throat. Each bite was an affirmation of her worth, a balm on the wound of rejection. She ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment. The silence in the room was no longer heavy and oppressive. It was peaceful, filled only with the soft sound of her silverware against the plate and the comforting presence of her father. Veronica, who had remained frozen near the doorway, watched the scene with impotent venom in her eyes. Her meticulously constructed plan to solidify her control over the house and erase Lena's presence had backfired spectacularly. She was no longer the queen of this castle. She was a spectator in her own dining hall, ignored and irrelevant. The sight of Richard serving Lena, treating her with a devotion he rarely showed, was more than she could bear. She had expected an argument, a fight behind closed doors, where she could use her tears and manipulations. But this public repudiation, this complete reordering of the family hierarchy, had utterly disarmed her. Richard wasn't just angry. He was acting, restructuring his world, his business, and his family life with the same ruthless decisiveness. He was, in effect, liquidating the emotional assets she thought she possessed. With a sound that was half a sob, half a growl of frustration, Veronica turned and stormed up the stairs, her steps heavy and furious. The sound of a door slamming upstairs was the final punctuation mark on her defeat. Richard and Lena didn't react. Her drama no longer belonged to them. "Daddy," Lena said between bites, her voice still a little timid, "I saved something." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the silver locket. Carefully, she opened it and showed her father the picture of her mother. "I talk to her when I miss her," she confessed. Richard took the small locket in his large hand. He looked at the smiling face of his late wife, and a wave of emotion hit him. He remembered the love, the joy, and the promise he had made to her to always take care of their daughter. In his relentless pursuit of growing his fortune, of building an empire of assets and investments to secure Lena's future, he had almost lost her present. He had failed in his promise. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you look so much like her. Strong, brave, and with the kindest heart I know." He closed the locket and placed it back around Lena's neck. "I'm so sorry, my daughter. I'm sorry I wasn't here, that I was so busy with things that don't matter nearly as much as you do. That is going to change, I promise." And Lena, looking into her father's eyes, saw the sincerity of his promise. She knew, with the absolute certainty only a child can possess, that this night, which had begun as the darkest of her life, had become the beginning of something new and bright. In the days that followed, Richard's promise manifested not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in a series of quiet, profound changes that reconfigured the atmosphere of the house. The tension that had once hung in the air like a cold fog began to dissipate, replaced by a calm the mansion hadn't known in a long time. The most significant change occurred punctually, every evening at 7 o'clock. The long mahogany table, which had been the stage for so much pain, was transformed. Richard instituted a new, simple, unbreakable rule. Dinner was an event for two. He rearranged his business schedule with the same precision he used to manage his investments in Bitcoin and the stock market. Evening meetings were cancelled, international calls postponed. He was home every night to sit at the table with Lena. The place of honor at the head of the table now belonged permanently to her. For the first dinner after that fateful night, Lena found at her place not just a plate, but a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers. Every night, Richard asked about her day at school, about her friends, about the pictures she liked to draw. He listened, not with the distraction of a man whose thoughts were on foreign markets and dividend fluctuations, but with the focused attention of a father rediscovering his daughter. For Lena, these dinners were more valuable than all the gold in her father's vaults. They were a daily confirmation of her place in the world, of her unquestionable worth. She blossomed under this new sun of attention, her laughter echoing through the dining hall that had once known only tense whispers. Eleanor, the housekeeper, was also given new orders. Richard promoted her, giving her full autonomy over the kitchen and Lena's meals. "From now on, Eleanor, you are the guardian of my daughter's happiness," he told her. "Prepare her favorite dishes. Make sure she always has fresh fruit and the chocolate cake she loves so much." The joy on Eleanor's face was immense. Freed from Veronica's oppressive supervision, she cooked with a renewed love, and every dish she served Lena was a small celebration. As for Veronica, she became a ghost in her own home. She spent most of her time in her room, refusing to participate in the new family rituals. The public humiliation ate away at her. Her relatives no longer called, too ashamed to face her or Richard. The social control she so valued, the parties and dinners that were the bedrock of her identity, had vanished. Her public image was tarnished, and she knew the story of that night would, in one form or another, spread through the circles she tried so hard to impress. She tried to confront Richard once, in his study, accusing him of cruelty, of isolating her. He listened calmly, his fingers drumming on a stack of cash flow reports. When she was finished, he looked at her with eyes devoid of anger, but also of affection. "I didn't isolate you, Veronica. I protected my daughter. The house is large. You have everything money can buy. But my daughter's love and respect, and my own, you will have to earn back. And that can't be bought. It's built with kindness, something you have demonstrated you lack." The coldness of his analysis, as if he were assessing a bad investment, left her speechless. She realized the game had changed. He was no longer the absent, easily manipulated husband. He was Lena's father, first and foremost. One afternoon, while Richard was helping Lena with her homework in the library, she surprised him with a question. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy Veronica like me?" Richard stopped writing, the question hitting him harder than he expected. He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, Lena, grown-ups feel lost. And when they feel lost, they get scared, and fear can make them act in very ugly ways. It's not about you not being good enough. It never was. It's about her fear." Lena seemed to ponder this. "So she's afraid of me?" "I think she's afraid," Richard said, looking into his daughter's eyes, "of not being loved as much as you are." And in that moment of honesty, the wound in Lena's heart truly began to heal, not with anger or resentment, but with an understanding far beyond her years. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the night of the dinner party. The new routine in the mansion had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. The father-daughter dinners had become the highlight of the day, moments of genuine connection filled with conversation and laughter. Veronica's silence, entrenched in her suite, was a constant presence, but one that was gradually losing its oppressive power. The house was learning to breathe again. On a Friday evening, Richard and Lena were finishing dinner. Eleanor had made spaghetti and meatballs, Lena's favorite, and she was eating with a healthy appetite her father loved to see. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall, tapping softly against the tall windows of the dining hall. It was a cozy night, a sanctuary of peace they had built together. Suddenly, the door to the hall swung open. Veronica stood there. She wasn't wearing one of her extravagant silk gowns, but a simple cashmere robe. Her hair, normally in a flawless chignon, was down, and her face was bare of makeup. She looked smaller, more fragile, stripped of the armor of glamour and authority she always wore. Richard and Lena stopped eating, surprised. It was the first time she had joined them since the incident. Veronica didn't look at Richard. Her eyes were fixed on Lena, who stared back with cautious curiosity, her fork paused midway to her mouth. Slowly, Veronica walked to the table. She didn't go to her old place, now permanently empty and bare. Instead, she stopped beside Lena's chair, a few feet away. "Lena," she said, her voice low and hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in days. "Can we talk?" Richard tensed, ready to intervene, to shield Lena from any new attempt at manipulation. But he saw something in Veronica's eyes that made him hesitate. It wasn't anger nor arrogance. It was a deep exhaustion, a defeat that seemed to come from the soul. Lena looked to her father, seeking permission. He gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving Veronica. "Yes," Lena answered, her voice a whisper. Veronica took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I've been thinking a lot these last few days, alone, in my room." She paused, her eyes scanning the hall, the scene of her greatest humiliation. "I wanted this house to be perfect, for everything to be under my control. I wanted to impress everyone, to show I was a good wife, a good hostess. And I saw you as an obstacle." The confession hung in the air, raw and painful. "I thought that if I could make you smaller, it would make me seem bigger, more important. I was wrong, so wrong." Tears began to well in the corners of her eyes, tears that didn't seem calculated or theatrical, but genuine. "What I did to you that night, it was cruel, it was unforgivable. It wasn't a lesson, it was malice, pure and simple. And I am so sorry." She finally glanced at Richard, then back to Lena. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know. I needed to tell the truth, just once." Lena looked at this woman, the tyrant who had made her eat stale bread on the floor, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a sad, lost person, just as her father had said. She remembered the fear she had felt, the pain of hunger and humiliation. But she also felt a pang of something new, something that felt like pity. She slid down from her high chair and walked over to Veronica. Her father watched, his heart in his throat, ready to snatch her away at any second. But Lena simply stopped in front of her stepmother. She didn't hug her, didn't say she forgave her. She just reached out her small hand and, in a gesture of devastating purity, touched Veronica's arm. "It's okay," she said, with the honest simplicity of a child. And that touch, that small gesture of unearned grace, was what finally broke Veronica. She fell to her knees on the marble floor, the same floor where Lena had been humiliated, and she wept. A racking, convulsive sob, the sound of her pride shattering and a true regret being born. The sound of Veronica's crying filled the dining hall, a raw, painful echo of everything that had happened in that very space. Richard stood and walked to Lena, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, ready to pull her away if the situation became too overwhelming for her. But Lena stood her ground, her small hand still on the arm of the woman sobbing at her feet. She didn't feel fear, only a strange, quiet sadness. It was the end of a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. After what felt like an eternity, Veronica's sobs subsided into a quiet shudder. She lifted her tear-streaked face and looked at the child before her. For the first time, she didn't see an inconvenience or a reminder of Richard's first wife. She just saw Lena, a girl with a capacity for compassion she herself had never possessed. Slowly, Veronica rose to her feet, dignity returning to her not as arrogance, but as a sober acceptance of her failings. She looked at Richard, and in her eyes was a silent understanding. The lies, the power games. It was all over. "I'm leaving, Richard," she said, her voice steady, though exhausted. "I need some time to find myself, to understand how I became the person I was that night. This house, this life, it's not for me. Not now." Richard nodded, unsurprised. It was the only possible conclusion. There was no anger in his reply, only a melancholy acceptance. "I will ensure you have everything you need. The agreement we made will be honored. Your financial future is secure." The mention of money, of assets and agreements, which had once defined their relationship, now sounded hollow. They both knew the real bankruptcy had been an emotional one. The next day, Veronica packed her bags. There was no dramatic farewell. She left quietly while Lena was at school. She left behind the silk dresses, the jewelry, and the life she had so desperately tried to control. The house, for the first time in years, felt lighter, as if a weight had been permanently lifted from its foundations. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Lena's life found a new, happy equilibrium. Richard's promise wasn't just a momentary reaction to a crisis, it became the new foundation of their lives. He sold some of his more volatile stocks and restructured his business to require less of his time, delegating more and traveling less. He discovered that the real profit wasn't in quarterly dividends, but in his daughter's daily smiles. He drove her to school every morning and picked her up in the afternoon. They had picnics in the park on Saturdays and visited museums on Sundays. Richard rediscovered joy in simple things, the taste of strawberry ice cream, the sound of Lena's laughter on a swing, the feel of her small hand in his. Eleanor, now the undisputed mistress of the house, ensured their home was always a haven of warmth and comfort. She and Lena developed an even stronger bond, spending afternoons in the kitchen baking cookies and telling stories. The long mahogany table was finally retired. Richard had it moved to a rarely used banquet room, and in its place in the dining room, he put a small, round table of light-colored wood where only 4 people could sit comfortably. It was a table for a family, not for an audience. One evening, sitting at the new table, finishing a bowl of fruit salad, Lena looked up at her father with her serious eyes and asked, "Daddy, are you happier now?" Richard paused, spoon in the air, and looked around. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of an old clock. There was no more cold gleam of formality, only the warmth of daily life. He looked at his daughter, her face lit by the soft lamplight, and felt a wave of contentment so deep and real it surpassed any thrill the closing of $1 billion deal had ever given him. "Yes, my love," he answered, his voice full of genuine emotion. "I'm the richest man in the world." A year passed. The mansion, once a stage for the display of immense but cold wealth, had been transformed. The opulent, rarely used rooms now echoed with the sound of a child's hurrying footsteps and genuine laughter. The grand dining hall, with its dark memories, had been converted into a music and art room, where a grand piano shared space with painting easels and pots of colorful paint. Richard and Lena's life now revolved around the small, round table in the living room, positioned near the fireplace, which in the winter was always lit, casting a warm glow over them. On that autumn evening, the smell of Elvira's apple pie baking in the oven filled the house. Richard was sitting at the table, not reading treasury reports or analyzing the profitability of his applications, but trying to draw a horse on a piece of paper, following Lena's amused and slightly impatient instructions. "No, Daddy, the head is rounder," she said, laughing, as she took the pencil to correct his line. He laughed with her, an easy, genuine laugh he barely remembered having in his previous life. He looked at his daughter, her hair glowing in the lamplight, her eyes focused and full of life. The memory of the little girl, huddled on the marble floor, still haunted him sometimes, not as a ghost, but as a compass, a constant reminder of what was truly important, of what it meant to have a net worth of immeasurable value. He had learned that the greatest cash flow a man could wish for was the uninterrupted flow of a child's love and trust. His business still thrived, but in a different way. He had redirected some of his capital to found a charitable foundation in his first wife's name, dedicated to helping children in vulnerable situations. He discovered that the best investment wasn't in stocks or crypto, but in human dignity. The real profit was seeing the positive impact of his fortune on the world, a legacy far more lasting than numbers on a screen. After the apple pie, which they ate straight from the dish while sitting on the rug before the fire, Lena snuggled up beside her father. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Daddy," she whispered, sleepy, "remember that night? With the bread." Richard tensed for an instant, the comfort of the moment threatened by the shadow of the past. "Yes, my love, I remember. It's funny," she continued, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I don't feel sad when I remember it anymore. I just remember you arriving. You were like a superhero." He held her tighter, his heart filling with an emotion so overwhelming it almost hurt. He was no hero. He was just a father who had almost lost everything that mattered by not paying attention. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of childhood and home. Their journey had been short but transformative. It began with the bitterest of humiliations and ended in the sweetest of redemptions. The luxury, the power, and the vast fortune were still there, but now they were just the scenery, not the main story. The real story was right here, in this hug, in the warmth of the fire, in the certainty that no matter what happened in the world outside, within these walls, they had each other. Love was their legacy, their greatest asset, the only wealth that could never be lost.